Presenting now is Echezonachukwu Nduka from the University of Pennsylvania. Echezonachukwu Nduka is a pianist, award-winning poet, and author of two poetry collections, Chrysanthemums of Wide-Eyed Ghosts, 2018, and Waterman, 2020. He is interested in African pianism, African art music, performance studies, and the nexus between music and postcolonial Anglophone literatures, particularly poetry and nonfiction. His research focuses on the socio-cultural significations, spatial locations, and the politics of place, programming, musical meanings, and performance practices in African pianism. He has been featured as a pianist and poet with support from institutions including the Intercultural Music Initiative, IMI, Somers Point Arts Commission, the African Concert Series London, Casual Concert Series Buffalo, New York, Ocean City Free Public Library, Music in the Pavilion, Penn, New England Conservatory of Music, among others. A Benjamin Franklin Fellow, Nduka is currently pursuing a PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of Pennsylvania. Please welcome Echezonachukwu Nduka as he presents Staging Omojola and Ndodana-Breen, Beyond Mise-en-Scéne to Portrayals of Historical Figures.
Thank you very much for the beautiful introduction. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's a pleasure to be here, to be part of the symposium. Many thanks to the organizers and our distinguished scholars, Professor Kofi Agao and Professor Bode Omojola, and everyone here. It's such a privilege to be able to present my paper on African opera. So far, in African art music, we've been discussing instrumental music, choral music, and other aspects. I'd like to take us to opera. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, thank you once again. The title of my presentation, as already been mentioned by the person who graciously introduced me, is Staging Omojola and Ndodana-Breen, Beyond Mise-en-Scéne to Portrayals of Historical Figures. I will have as my outline what I'll be focusing on today. Staging an African opera, mise-en-scène, and notes on meanings. And I'll be looking at two historical figures, women, who have been represented in these works, Funmilayo and Winnie. So these are accounts of Africa's historical figures. And then we'll have Funmilayo on stage, Winnie the opera on stage, and then I'll end with a sort of comparative commentary on these works. So among all the art music genres composed by African composers and performed in Africa or anywhere in the world, opera appears to be the least performed in public theaters. What does it mean to stage an African opera today? So to put this question differently, what does it mean to stage an African opera which portrays and celebrates the lives of African historical figures? And how does the staging give life to the historical figures they portray? In the opera world, there are many well-known operas about real people and historical figures, particularly in Europe, but not so much work can be counted by African composers in that regard. So where African historical figures are celebrated in literary texts and theater, they are mostly men. But the near absence of female historical figures in African theater not only points to the blind spots of patriarchal societies, but places of burden of balance in Africa's theatrical works and productions. So in an interview by the Nigerian composer and scholar, Bode Omojola, He speaks about this lacuna by stating his resolve to balance the scale by composing operatic works centered on African female historical figures. So for my presentation, I'm going to focus on the staging and portrayals of historical figures from Nigeria and South Africa. So on the one hand, we have the Nigerian composer Bode Omojola's work, Funmilayo, which is based on Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, a Nigerian educator and anti-colonial political activist who led many protests against colonial forces in Nigeria and made a mark as a generational voice. Then on the other hand, you have the South African composer Bongani Ndodana-Breen's work, Winnie the Opera, which is based on Winnie Mandela, South African and anti-apartheid activist. Their lives as political voices and leaders come alive on stage in both operas through an assembly of factors upon which my presentation is based. So what are the critical considerations for staging an opera such as these? Bode Omojola argues for what he describes as the integration of multiple elements of performance. So in his call for the conception of operatic performance in Africa, in this presentation, a number of factors which make up the concept of mise-en-scène will form the basis of discourse and analysis for the appreciation of both works, particularly with reference to how the main characters portray the lives of these historical figures. One way of untying the knot of mise-en-scène is to address component issues of staging, which include the setting of the stage itself, the costumes, the lighting, the movement, and the use of space. All of these are important. So, Houghton and Houghton 2009, they mentioned this in their article on opera as a multimodal form. Yet it goes beyond what is put on stage. The thoughts and considerations for these decisions and the processes involved, it is not new that audiences take into consideration the process of staging. So we see what I have on screen when singing actors walk, need to see. When singing actors work with both libretto and score, and with the director's design concept, they do not only express themselves vocally, they also move, gesture, show emotions facially, and so on, as they act out the story. It is the mise-en-scène, that is, the theatrical construct that brings together all these semiotic resources of the operatic grammar that tells the story and tells it to both the neophyte opera spectator and to the veteran. So I have a number of references, to so many scholars, operatic scholars who've written on mise-en-scène and the meanings and the applications and all of that. Here is another one. When singing actors sing on stage, the two become part of the visual semiotic grammar, though, as we have seen, costuming, movement, and facial gestures, blocking, they operate within the musical mode. A particular way of interpreting their characters and their lives contribute to the audience's act of making meaning of what we're hearing and seeing. So we'll have other scholars who argue, who write about mise-en-scène as an aesthetic practice. For instance, Ball 2009, that it's one of the many techniques that engages the viewer in an aesthetic experience. And corroborations by Rayani, who sees it as a sort of mixture of cooperation between the director, the dramaturge, and the audience. So such fundamental questions, such as for whom is the opera stage and what is the audience prior knowledge on the subject, how these may form part of the lines of inquiry. So in this presentation, I'm going to, and for both operas and focus, I'll consider how the stage, the costumes, the lighting, the movement and gestures come together to suggest meanings and the ways in which they reinforce or tear down the historical figures which they portray. So while these components are salient, the narratives in both works will not be left out in the quest for meanings. In addition, it is important to note that the question and significance of time cannot be ignored in the final analysis. On the one hand, the Nigerian opera is based on a character whose active years were colonial and pre-independent. On the other, Ndodana-Breen's work is situated right at the center of South Africa's apartheid regime. So what do these times in history say about the choices of costumes, the stage props, language and diction, lighting, movement, and other factors? To what extent are these factors faithful to time? Are there points of divergence? If yes, why so? These questions are more will form a basis for analysis and further discourse on selected video excerpts. I'm going to be playing just very short video examples to show what the discussion. And parts of this paper I draw on Amanda Weidman's voice, the use of voice and anthropology sort of the material qualities of voice. What does it mean in performance in terms of analysis? If there is tension, roughness, or breathiness, loudness or pitch range, just like Hitchon, and the many ways in which the voice can be used or interpreted in that context. So we're looking at two composers. We have Bode Omojola, who is one of our distinguished scholars, and from Nigeria and South Africa, Bongani Ndodana-Breen. And these are the two women, the historical figures, Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, Nigeria, and Winnie Mandela, South Africa. So these are some of the points on the lives. I wouldn't want to spend so much time reading and going, through their lives, but here are the main points to note. Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, 1900 to 1978. She was known as the Lioness of Lisa B. She organized the Abeokuta Ladies Club, ALC, later known as Abeokuta Women's Union. She led public campaigns against price controls, ran for a seat at the Regional Assembly as the candidate of NCNC in 1951. She was known as the Mother of Africa and first woman to be appointed to the Western House of Chiefs. In 1965, she received the award of the Order of Niger, and in 1970, the Lenin Peace Prize. On the other hand, we have Winnie Mandela, who passed in 2018. She was an anti-apartheid activist, as already mentioned, and she was referred to Mother of the Nation, became politicized at an early age in her job as a hospital social worker, led the Free Robert McBride campaign in front of the Department of Foreign Affairs in the Union Building in Pretoria. That's in June 1998. She served as a former member of the National Assembly of South Africa and was the ex-wife of former South African President Nelson Mandela. Now we'll go to the stage. So first we have a short excerpt of Funmilayo on stage. In the video excerpt we're going to see now have the soprano aria, not a sprint. And I'm looking at this from a perspective of an audience or a scholar who's trying to analyze. And I have my limitations because I still do not have access to the full, maybe the libretto and the full work, which I'm hoping to have. So the main character here, Funmilayo, played by the Nigerian-born soprano Miraculama, performs the aria surrounded on stage by other women, all dressed in typical rebel-style Nigerian clothing. So in the excerpt, you're going to see the near empty stage has a few boxes of personal effects. In the view, there's a throne behind the characters and the king is absent. So a closer look will reveal that all the characters are barefoot with facial gestures mirroring the theme of the aria itself, particularly at intervals when Funmilayo sings, "To be weary is to die." The aria, being a call to fellow comrades to not give up on the struggle and quest for liberty, is reinforced by both the main characters' gestures and those of the other women on stage. What is immediately obvious is the minimal use of lighting in the excerpt under review. However, it must be noted that the background is conspicuously dark and unchanged. What does this mean within the context of the aria and the larger opera itself? The lighting choice corroborates the theme of resistance and the many low points located in the entire narrative. Considering the fact of the king's abdication, the choice of lighting suggests a critical loss, one which, in a sense, suggests that the city is without traditional leadership, but also free from colonial oppression in the guise of taxation. So this mix of sadness and triumph, you can see that in the faces of the women as they stand guard contemplating the words of their leader, Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti. And during the first interlude, the women step back, they hold hands and form a semicircle around the throne as though it was being protected by an intruder. from an intruder. So this gesture connects to a larger meaning in the plot, considering that the king abdicated the throne following Funmilayo and women's successful protest against colonial authorities. Then I go on to talk about their gestures and meanings. But in this opera, the composer Bode Omojola uses instrumental interlude to signal stage movement. So uh, when they stop singing and there is a sort of interlude, that is when they move on stage and do certain things. But then I ask, what does it mean? What does Funmilayo's lone presence on stage mean after the exit of the women? Because the women, they moved the throne off the stage. So this solemn yet radical act of moving the throne off the stage, including the platform on which it was placed, could be interpreted as an absolute triumph, or better still, an attempt at erasing the reality of colonial subjugation. In a larger context, Funmilayo's aria can be interpreted as a feminist battle for freedom of women against domestic and capitalistic strictures. And the rest of the women that exist the stage, Funmilayo is left alone, an indication of our personal will, struggles, and conviction, which all connect to the collective movement. Alternatively, it may be viewed as a spotlight on our character, the historical figure on whom the story is based. In the excerpt under review, the Funmilayo on stage is not portrayed as a combative figure, but as a contemplative leader who wields influence through effective communication. Now, all of these is just based on just this excerpt of this area, which I found. Let's just have a quick listen.
Fight, we must fight.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So let's go to Winnie. So the video excerpts that we're going to look at, it shows a scene in Soweto with many middle-aged people led by Winnie, who stands in the front, the character there. So here Winnie is played by the South African soprano Tsakani Masawangani, dressed in a military fatigue. For what I'm about to do, O Africa, she sings. Part of the aria is almost definitive as she sings, believe me, there's no other way. So it is clear that she has the full attention of the people behind her, an indication of her leadership quality as an activist. The stage reflects a typical neighborhood in Soweto. The people appear in quotidian costumes, particularly with a crowd of that, what a crowd of that sort would wear in the 1970s during the Soweto uprising. So we would see the placards, the visible placards in the background, unban the ANC, police out of Soweto, the people shall govern and stop apartheid killings, and all of that. So those standing behind Winnie Mandela, they represent people from different backgrounds with whom she stood up to the apartheid regime. The clergy, the parents, the workers, members of the Mandela United Football Club, and a lot of other people. So we see the light and I talk about the gestures on stage. Winnie exudes defiance, that's the character, a trait which put her in trouble many times with the apartheid regime. From the timestamp, I use timestamps 152 to 208, where she paces as she sings, gesturing with her hands and maintaining a serious facial expression to underscore the severity of her undertaking while projecting an image of a powerful figure. So the lighting is dim there with very little or minimal changes, save for the last part when, after they raise the clenched fists in solidarity, lights come on and the voice of the police announces through the speakers, "This is an illegal gathering," and then everyone runs off. here let's see this brief example, and then I'll go on. So in another video excerpt, in response to a journalist's question, a journalist met her, people were gathering, waiting for her outside her house, and she responded to the journalist, there will be one man, one vote. That is inevitable, as we can see here in the excerpt that I'm going to show. And in this scene, like the rest of the opera, it's based on true account, on a real life event. In fact, I found newspaper clippings of that report in the press. So let's look at that.
Mrs. Mandela, will there ever be one man, one vote in this country?
Okay, so let's go on.
Mrs. Mandela.
As we saw in just one of the examples I played, you see this protest gesture, that can be traced all the way back to maybe civil rights movement in the USA, the Black Power protest gesture. We've seen many activists use this gesture, even musicians as well. So this is the sort of reenactment, but we'll get to that. Maybe we see the end of the opera, how they all raise their hand. So these scenes, they portray Winnie as an activist whose mission did not succumb to the vagaries of time and seasons. So whatever the time of the day was, Winnie Mandela was ready, and the causes for which she championed remained the same. To close, I'm going to run a quick sort of comparative commentary on both works. The staging, the two operas are connected in more ways than the telling of African
Nduka.
story.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. I just want to update you and let you know that you have 1 minute to go. We considered 20 minutes, but you have.
Yes, yeah, I'm rounding up now.
Okay.
Yes, so on the staging and location, I'm looking at the performance peculiarities and the staging, and then of course issues on language, the bilingual texts, which also point to sort of shared colonial history in the text, and then the historical context in which they were shown, and the historical context that they represent. So both productions, in my view, demonstrate the extent to which prior knowledge on a story influences meanings from the audience point of view. What would these stories mean when staged in a location where audiences have no idea about the lives and works of these historical figures? What if the accounts were known? And to what extent would the audience compare what they see on stage to the prior knowledge of the historical figures? And then I ask, what is the place of fiction and truth in historicizing historical figures on stage? and as both operas are true accounts of these figures. In fact, in the premiere of Winnie the opera, um, the historical figure herself, which is a very rare thing, was there. She spoke. She was part of the audience, and at the end of the performance, she came on stage, and then she called the. There's a video of her calling the character who played the role, and say, just look at both of us. Well, even when I was much younger, I didn't look anything like this, and it made me think a lot about what we call maybe authenticity in this sort of characterization. Maybe she believed that this is not really how she looked. To what extent sort of physical attributes count to representation of historical figures. So yes, in conclusion, let me quickly see my conclusion. Funmilayo and Winnie the Opera point towards the possibilities of staging African operas based on historical figures. Both works present an important part of Nigerian and South African histories, particularly the role of women activists. Funmilayo, Ransome-Kuti, and Winnie Mandela, whose feminist ideals, leadership, and influence challenged oppressive regimes. Drawing on theoretical submissions on mise-en-scène and features of staging, have offered critical, theoretical submissions and analyses in pursuit of meanings, but also to interrogate the portrayals of the historical figures based on their true accounts. African perspectives on opera in relation to staging historical figures are not only important but necessary in discourses of opera studies and performances today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. In case we have questions, we have suggestions, we have at least the floor is open to engage Nduka. So I have a question for you while we're waiting for other people to get their thoughts together. So mine is not necessarily about this particular presentation, or it may be part of it, but most importantly, my question is around your own work and your positionality in this part of, in your work now and in this presentation. You are known as, okay, let me put it within the context of this conversation, this symposium. You are one of the those pianists that I use those in quote now, that are propagating, you know, the works of African art musician in terms of recording, in terms of concerts. So could you please share with us what's your own perception in terms of reception of these works as a pianist? You know, you
mean African pianism, African art music for piano?
Yes.
Reception. Oh, in terms of reception, yeah, I'll share my own experience. I think people are very curious. When concert goers see something, maybe a flyer or something about African pianism, I think some of them do not know what to expect. And I say this because I often engage in, post-concert conversations. I like to discuss with the people. I don't run away after performing. I stay around and talk to people, and they ask me a lot of questions. So yeah, I've realized that people are very curious. They want to know. They want to learn. Even for those who consider themselves, these art connoisseurs, they know everything about all the canon and all of that. Some of them are really sometimes surprised that there are composers from Africa, West Africa, for piano even. So yeah, when I perform, my performances are well received. I remember, in fact, this question made me to decide that I was going to have a scholarly background in African pianism in addition to performance, to actually pursue it as, as a one of my main research focus. The person said, "Oh, one of the pieces you played, it sounded like jazz. Is it jazz? It has a lot of syncopation." I wasn't sure what to answer. I said, "No, this is African music. It's like African art music, classical piano music. I don't know if it's." The person interpreted it as jazz, and it made me think about audience perception and reception and how they are hearing. There is a difference between hearing from a place of knowing and hearing from a totally different background of not knowing. if you're from that cultural background, you hear certain rhythms on the piano, you know that there's some drumming going on there. People who are not used to that rhythm do not understand that, and will probably interpret it in a different way. And that is why, for instance, the works of Fredo Norosoke has been likened to Bela Bartok, and some works by Eastern European composers. If you hear real Prokofiev and some sort of heavy rhythmic work, and listen to some works of African pianism, sometimes you cannot make the difference unless you understand what's going on in there culturally. So I think people who are open-minded, they're listening and they want to come and learn. And I have to give credit to the works of William Chapman Nyaho, for instance, Rebecca Omodia, and our distinguished scholars who've been writing and publishing, but most especially for those who've been recording. And the work that Nyaho did with the publication, the the
Anthology.
volumes, the 5 volumes of
Anthology.
yeah, the anthology, yes. So now it's beginning, people are beginning to record and are listening to it, and beginning to study it for exams and things like that. So I think people are, open-minded and they want to listen, and hope gradually it's beginning to make its way into repertoires and concerts, but it's still the work, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Wow.
Yeah, but there's a very good reception. But I think people, the listeners, they immediately try to compare it to something they've heard before, maybe some jazz, or so they're not sure how to interpret it, which makes me even more curious to press further as a researcher
Yeah, I
myself,
like that.
to know what they're hearing and how they're hearing it and how they're making meanings. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Yes, what you just said now actually open another kind of one, which we are not going to open here today. But I just want to ask you, now coming back to your presentation today, what will you say, let's say in the next, talking about the future of African sustainability and the future of the genre now called, perhaps we are calling African arts music. What would you say, even as a performer and a scholar from your, in the next 20 years, what do you think it would look like, particularly from the performer perspective? That's the first layer. The second layer, which dovetail that one, is the fact that what would you recommend or suggest for, let's say, African scholars, performers to do, even on the continent, to maybe your response to first one to do in terms of sustaining the work, So I don't know. Yeah, to sustain and promote and make it more African, in quote.
I've been thinking about this myself for a while now. I don't want to run the risk of just giving a simplistic response of, students who study piano should try to perform the music more outside of academic institutions. But then what are the structures in place? How many concert halls do we have? Who are these people who are going to pay and buy tickets to sit down and listen to African pianism or African music or some of our productions? It's going to take a lot of time, and then of course we need more collaboration with the media to put this work out there. There are people who do not even know that there are recordings of African art music, maybe for piano or other mediums of expression on YouTube, on Spotify, and all of that. Maybe it goes back to one of our earlier presentations about visibility and putting in the work to be out there. But I would, yes, say that beyond taking playing performance examinations in school, to try and perform more or see the ways in which some of these works can be recorded. When I like to think that when composers see their works performed and recorded more often, they are encouraged to compose more, because it's not always the case that you have this commission, getting commission to compose music. But when you see that nobody likes to compose for the bookshelf, so when we have more performances and more, if we encourage more people to go into performance and not just only performing within the walls of academic institutions, but outside of that, to play seasonal concerts and just to keep going and going. Because what I foresee is that if we do not take it very seriously, in the coming years, you mentioned 20 years, maybe before then, we'll probably have some pianists from other parts of the world. You'll hear that some Chinese pianists have come to Lagos, to Moson, to give um, masterclass on African pianism. I don't know if anything is wrong with that, but I feel some type of way. Yeah, so you have to take it up as people who own this music and keep playing and performing it and recording it. Um, so that when we zoom in into the space, we can see that the music is alive. Because one of the challenges I'm having is that, we want to look at the performances of this work to do some sort of field work or research to get into the spaces where these works are performed. And they're very limited, mostly in academic institutions. Even here in the United States, there are places, halls where they perform, but it's mostly, lecture recitals. We go to schools, colleges, and all of that. We look forward to when we'll have that happening on stage in different concert stages, which is why the work that Rebecca Omojola is doing in the UK is very important, because now the African Concert Series London is partnering with Wigmore Hall, and you have and other spaces. You have these concerts happening. So I just think we need to just keep going and not relent. I don't know if I have answered your question, but it's a question I've asked myself and I do not have answers yet.
Well, thank you so much. That question, the answer to it is always a work in progress, Yeah, and I understand. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
we have three, yeah. So 2 online and 1 on ground. So we have, in this order, let's take it this order. We have Mr. Kolawole Ganikale. I think I'm happy. He's showing his face now. That's good. Oh, we're going to see Mr. Then we are going to have Dr. Jennifer Larue, then Mr. Sheung Owaje locally. Oh, and Dr. Adeolu Abi. So we have 4 people. Actually. So let's start from Mr. Kolawole Ganikale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, yours is quite very rich and detailed presentation. I enjoyed it very much, and I particularly found your analysis for staging, particularly the use of gesture, the light and voice. I found them to be truly illuminating, especially in how they help us to interpret political history on stage. That said, I'd like to share 2 quick reflections. First, you mentioned that prior knowledge of Funmilayo, Ransome-Kuti, and Winnie Mandela shapes audience interpretation. So, but what occurs when that knowledge is absent, or when audience brings in distorted or biased understanding? Do these operas serve as tools of education as well as representation? Secondly, I'm sort of curious about the medium itself. Opera is such a loaded Western form. Do you think that these works are transforming the operatic tradition from within, or are we simply translating African narratives into a Western framework? Your presentation raises a powerful questions, actually, and I hope it fosters further dialogue on how we stage our histories, particularly the lives of African women, in ways that both honor their legacies and challenge dominant aesthetic paradigms.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe let me start from your last comment on the transformation. I don't think it's like a direct just lifting of our African maybe narratives and the sort of musical sensibilities into opera to make it just to have an African opera. There's this sort of intercultural approach that happens in the music itself. looking beyond just the gestures and all that to the music itself. If we look at the work, the opera, the compositions of Professor Bode Omojola, for instance, there is this intercultural approach in the music, the composition, where you have the symphony, the orchestra playing the music, but you also have the talking drums or the gongs you hear. So it's like you have a music full composition for Western orchestra, but also African traditional, indigenous musical instruments performing together. So to give it a sort of maybe music and cultural identity that goes beyond just what you have in Western in opera as you have it in art music. And also that also reflects in the use of language, like I mentioned. It's not just in English, you have maybe Yoruba here, Kosa here, and all of that that happens. Then yes, I raised the question about prior knowledge, what it means in making meaning. So this is where it becomes a little bit tricky. When people already have an idea in their mind about a historical figure, they go to the opera with expectations. They want to see certain things, and when it doesn't happen a certain way, maybe they see it as a distortion or something. But it also depends on the composer intention or the work of the librettist who wrote the libretto, how the story is going, whether there are maybe some sort of revisions and all of that. If it's in a society where they do not know this person before, I would assume that they would accept whatever is put on the stage as this is a representation, a true representation of this historical figure. But I was making a distinction between having a prior knowledge and not having that, so that when you go to opera and then you know about this historical figure, and then there's a distortion, then it changes the way in which that opera is appreciated. So I think that is a factor. The point why I raise it is to say that this is a factor in meaning making, and the significance of the work itself and what it means to the audience. I'm always interested in the audience. When we get to the concert and listen to whether it's piano, African pianism or whatever, what does this mean to the audience? What do they hear and how are they interpreting it? So yes, I think that is a factor. Yeah, for meaning, yes.
The sonic representation, right?
Yeah, sonic
Where
representation. Yeah,
it,
the work has to mean something. The work has to mean something.
yeah,
There has to be something. Yes.
where
Mm.
this is good to see your presentation as a reminder that the opera isn't just about Wigs and Wagner. It can be revolution.
Oh yes. Yeah, we have our own.
Yeah,
We have our own.
nice,
Thank you.
really nice.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Mhm.
So can we have Dr. Jennifer Laru?
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you for allowing us to join in from all over the world. Hello from Georgia. Thank you again for this great presentation. Earlier on one of your slides, you mentioned African feminism, and I just would love to hear you speak more. If I'm not mistaken, I think you had that on one of your slides, and
Feminist ideas, yes.
feminist
Yes.
ideas. And I was wondering if you could speak more about that and how you think that impacts the portrayal of these characters versus portrayal of women, perhaps in Western operas. Maybe more generally, I know that's a really, really broad question, but it's just something I was interested in hearing you speak about.
The portrayal of women, yes, it's a very broad question. But yes, the feminist ideas of these women, they were both feminists in their own rights, but in the performance of the opera, just putting on stage the opera and the gestures of the characters, the librettos, the words that they say and everything, you could see the feminist ideals, the leadership qualities, everything come alive on stage. So I would say that they were well represented. You could see that they were not distorted. And this was not like a sort of misrepresentation of history, because in many traditional African societies there were many women even to date who have been feminists, who believed in big rights, equal rights, and the voice of women, and movement, who became leaders in their own rights, who didn't even know what the word feminism meant. To them, it was natural. It was something natural. So yes, I would say that their works were, these ideas were represented very well in both compositions. Comparing that to the works of Western operas, I wouldn't know. That would be something beyond what I can explain now. Maybe I do not have um, adequate knowledge, to be able to make a sort of critical commentary on that, because it's a sort of comparative, looking at it in a comparative commentary, and I may not be able to do that adequately. But I know, is it Madame Butterfly? There are some, yeah, some operas, Western operas, that do not, yeah, treat women very well, the female characters. But it also depends on the composer intention, the intention of the person who wrote the libretto and all of that, and what each opera is trying to portray. So I don't know if it will be a fair judgment to do that. Maybe these operas will be judged based on their own, what their own ideas, unique ideas, and what they're trying to portray. But it's also, I think, a good thing to do a sort of comparative analysis in that sense. It's just that these are like very historical. These operas are based on the true life story of it. So it's not like some libretto that someone came up with, so some different work of imagination. This is based on the lives of these women, and they were feminists. So the important thing is that their feminist ideas were represented in the music and on stage. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you so much. Let's come back in house quickly. Let's go to Mr. Shinwaje.
Good evening, Echezona. Thank you so much for
good evening, sir.
Thank you so much for the beautiful presentation. I enjoyed it. Now, just to digress a little bit, I'm kind of curious, just a little curious, about what is the present acceptance in terms of the general public now, not the academia, of these two operas that you have spotlighted. I'm asking this question because, the two composers of these operas, they are composers that are somewhat academically inclined, associated with the academia. They are not mainstream composers out there, out there in the world, if you know what I mean. So I'm just kind of a little curious.
Yes, I understand.
I'm a little curious that what is the general acceptance so far of these two operas? Part of what piqued my curiosity is the fact that, when you were doing the presentation, when we heard this, the little pockets of the little, places that you played in the opera, I heard some what you call verismo phrases, which are kind of representative of Italian opera, Puccini, Verdi, and so on and so forth. I heard some of those phrases, in which, sopranos are singing, very high up there in a certain, characteristically Italian opera style. And I know that this, Verdi and Puccini, for example, and the other, Donizetti and so on and so forth. They are not academic people. They are people, they are composers who composed for the people, for the general acceptance of people. So I'm kind of a little curious that so far, what is the acceptance level, outside of the academia, and what is the hope of further acceptance of these works, in and outside the academia, in the future? Thank you.
Yeah.
A little bit more,
you.
comment. Sorry, just one little comment on the future, African pianism and all that, that I believe, still talking about general acceptance. I hope I'm not answering the question that I just asked, but just a little bit on, African pianism and, general African art music. I believe that there's a bit of some hope, in acceptance of art music, even outside of the academia. Basically, music is elements of music, which is in the melody, the harmony, the chords, and of course some other extra musical elements, which I think, if well cooked, using that general language, if well cooked enough to suit the palate of the general audience, I think the general, now this is a very, very convoluted argument that could go on and on and on, but I just wanted to chip this in, that if this music is, if the elements that would, if it is well cooked, if it's well put together in a way in which the general audience would accept, I think there's some more hope in the general audience accepting of this. But I'd like to know what's, these two operas, I'd like to know what if you have any answers to this, to the question that I just asked concerning these operas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You raised a very critical question, which is part of the paper itself, part of my concluding thoughts. I'm of the opinion that the acceptance of of a work, an operatic work such as this, cannot be divorced from the reality of staging, from maybe where they are staged and the sort of audiences that the people who go to see these operas. The first one, Winnie the Mandela, was staged in 2011 in Pretoria. I'm not sure. I think it was on a public concert hall that it was staged. And since then, there's been no public record of the performance of that Winnie the opera. And then we have Funmilayo, which was staged in school, in the university on campus. Part of what Professor Omojola, very interesting work that he does with the students, and they perform these within the four walls of the institution. So I don't know how open to the public for the letter it is. So if you're talking about maybe public, maybe reception or critical reception, we'll be looking at the sort of locations or places where these operas are staged, and how much how much people know about them, maybe to write some sort of critical reviews, opera reviews about them, and for people to go and see them. But if they're mostly within academic institutions, they may not be that known in that instance. And so it's not like the operas were performed or you're putting on stage at Met Opera or something like that. I'm just thinking in that direction. I don't know if I'm absolutely correct, but it's just one way of thinking of looking at it. The reality of the staging, where it is staged, and everything around that. So yes, I think that forms part of how the work will be received. If you stage the opera in a very big opera halls, maybe you're doing something in Bayreuth or some very historical places, where even if they do not know the opera or the composer, they're curious enough to go, and there are reviewers who are reviewing whether they know what they're writing or not, to bring the sort of attention needed for such a groundbreaking work, then that sort of attention and discourse will form around that. But if it's within academic institutions, I don't know how far that will go in terms of critical reception. So yes, I think the staging, the place also plays a role. That's one way of seeing it. I'm sure there will be other ways of seeing it. I'm actually very curious to know what Professor Omojola thinks about it, because I don't want to draw him into making comments on his own work, but he's like one of the main figures here. So composing and staging, that reality of staging, I think it will open up windows to a whole lot of other things, other possibilities. So that's one way I look at it. For the future, if there will be um, opportunities to work with opera directors, in other opera halls and other places where it's possible to, put this opera in big opera stages. I think that would be very fantastic and welcome. And to a large extent, it's going to encourage our composers to even do more work in that regard.
Also, I think quickly we have you can a follow up from Mr. Sheung. Then we have Dr. Abidem. But we are going to close after that. Don't worry. So, I like the point you made regarding review of works. I think it's one of the ways in which even popular music has been sustained. Yeah, when you release an album, then there are strategic outlets, media outlets that's going to pick it up and do some very, very dramatic review, different forms, yeah, just to create narrative, Prof called it narrative yesterday, and he told us the power of narrative, create something around it. And that narrative becomes the picture that people have of that product, of that cultural product. Yeah. So Professor Omojola's opera is very recent, Yeah, but I'll come back to that. The first one, I have a little experience about a particular opera, particularly within the South African scholarly and social context. First of all, the opera is so popular in South Africa. Of course, for the obvious reasons that is the protagonist is one of the hero in South African recent political history. That's one. Number two is also that it also depends on the kind of academic community. The South African academic community are so much interested also in propagating the post-apartheid and apartheid narrative. So it's a social capital also. So the opera coming in 2011 came at a strategic time where not only the popular media, like news outlets, were engaging it. Even this, as we speak today, students are still engaging that opera, even for their masters, for their PhDs, and at conferences, you are definitely going to see one or two presentations around that particular opera. So the point is that work of this nature, they are also contextual and depend on who is telling the story. They are stories on their own, but they also need people to tell that story, to transfer the story. And in the general context, there is a need for scholars, to engage. The Winnie Mandela has been so popular in South Africa, not only because of the general public, but also because the scholars have deeply engaged that material. And as we speak, people are still engaging because it's still relevant in the political context. The more, any moment you mention apartheid, that opera is still relevant, So, and the same, there's a potential for the same visibility for Funmilayo, but that now depend on Nigerian scholars or Nigerian scholars in diaspora to pick up that work and do the same, a kind of critical engagement with the work in different ways. So for instance, if we have a student who is working on his or her PhD thesis on that work, that's one. Then people pick it up, they review it at conferences, but also perhaps this is my own personal message to Prof. Is there any way we can also stage this opera in Lagos, Ibadan, particularly Abeokuta? Yeah. Okay. Let's get to Mr. Sean.
Prof, to follow up on that question, I just have one little comment question to well, Prof, I'm just wondering whether you share Milton Babbitt's sentiment concerning these issues of acceptance. You know what Milton Babbitt saying that who cares who listens? So I'm just wondering whether you are sharing that. That sentiment. Well, if people listen to you, fine, good. If they don't, they can they can take a flight and jump in the lake.
My silence will be misinterpreted. I would have preferred to be silent. So this is not my presentation. Send your questions to Nduka Echezonachukwu. I have written my work. You deal with it. We had a full packed house on the 3 nights this particular opera was shown. It was well received. There have been at least one critical study published in Journal Opera in the United States. So, and it was just 2 years ago. Okay, so I've written that opera. I love it. Whatever you want to say, I've done my job. Thank you.
Okay, let's go back to Nduka, then we'll come back to Prof. My point, I think you are yet to respond to that. Are we bringing it to Abeokuta, Lagos, Ibadan, or your? Okay, somebody's even volunteering here to play a role. So, okay, perhaps during the tea break, we'll discuss that. Okay, let's go back to Nduka. Oh, one more, please. Sorry. Let's make it brief, please.
Well, I'd like to pick it from that very last point. We've staged Prof's opera in Ife as well as in Ondo. Okay, and we're looking forward to more. Yes, yes. No, not Funmilayo. I've just been engaging in that. Would like to have more. So we've been doing that. So it's not just coming to Lagos, it's coming up there too. Thank you very much. All right. I also want to just share my thought or reflection concerning the presentation. Like previous people have spoken, it's also a concern, the Ben Canto's style of presentation. Sometimes well, let me simply put it this way. Has it really shown or represented, Africa? Yeah, the story, the theme, and other things, but then the music, if it's not seen, it could be mistaken, So, but then, thank God for the composer. He has done his own job. It's left for us to engage that, like he said. Then, to the presenter, I just want to ask, what would you say if you still have the opportunity to say one or two things? If that same work is presented through the musical has been another, music theater genre that has been trending, at least in Nigeria in recent time. What if will it also have that same effect as presented, through the opera? Will it reflect, what you saw and what you presented? What do you think, comparing, the presentation as an opera and as a musical? If you're still there, maybe you want to say something.
Okay, Nduka, hand over to you.
I guess you never know until it is done, because we work with what we see. My answer now will be based on just the imagination of what's going to happen on stage, because my work is based on putting onto stage, mise-en-scène, everything that goes on stage, that art of putting onto stage. So, because all the lighting, the movements, the costume, the stage, everything about the production will be taken into account as well in the analysis and thinking about this, and maybe they also will matter in terms of reception and how people see and understand the work. I guess we'll never know until that happens, but I'm imagining that it will probably be slightly different. What will happen here in musical is a little bit different. You see here, this is opera, proper opera. You saw the orchestra, performing, playing the music and all of that. So there might be some differences. It's also the story itself, the libretto and everything, to see if there are any changes or anything going on stage. So I guess we never know until we see that sort of production and then look at it in its own, on its own terms, and maybe do a sort of comparative analysis with that and the opera itself. Yeah, but I imagine that there will be a little bit of difference. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nduka. Can we give Nduka a round of applause? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I think
Thank you.
The last presenters
Thank you very much.
always, like the same thing yesterday, we had a kind of intense engagement, and today we are having the same. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is day 2 of the African Art Music Symposium at Mountain Top University, the organhouse. So